Welcome to Life Confessions TV. Try to relax and feel the story.
My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like a background character in my own story. At every holiday dinner, every birthday party, every church fundraiser, there was always one shining star in the room. My older sister, Rebecca. Rebecca the attorney. Rebecca the success story. Rebecca the daughter my mother introduced with pride, and my father defended with silence. And then there was me, the daughter who never quite found her way. The daughter who worked with her hands. The daughter people smiled at politely before turning back to someone more important. 3 weeks before Christmas last year, my mother humiliated me in front of a table full of relatives and family friends. She said it with a laugh, the way cruel people often do when they want everyone else to join in. She lifted her wine glass, looked around the room, and said, "One daughter closes million-dollar contracts. The other folds towels and makes beds." Everyone laughed, not because it was funny, because they knew exactly what she meant. I smiled. I stood up. I collected empty plates. And I said nothing. What none of them knew was that 10 days later, those same people would sit in a downtown ballroom and watch my name appear on a giant screen above a stage, while a room full of executives applauded the company I had built in secret. They thought I was cleaning houses. The truth was, I was running one of the fastest-growing private hospitality service firms in the city. And one of my biggest clients was the luxury hotel where my sister hosted corporate events. That was the funny part. My family had spent years admiring the places I worked in without ever once wondering who was behind them. I grew up in a suburb outside Dallas, in a brick house with white shutters and a front lawn my mother cared about more than she cared about most people. Everything in our family was about appearances. Clean windows, perfect holiday cards, smiling photos at church, the right clothes, the right schools, the right careers. My mother, Elaine, believed respect came from titles: doctor, lawyer, executive. Anything else was something to hide in conversation. My father, Thomas, had spent 30 years in banking, and by the time I was old enough to notice, he had already perfected the art of disappearing while someone else got hurt. He wasn't mean. That would have required courage. He was passive. He watched things happen and called it peace. My sister, Rebecca, was 2 years older than me and brilliant in the way people never let you forget. Top of her class, law school, corporate firm, tailored dresses, perfect hair, a husband in commercial real estate, 2 children with expensive names and private swimming lessons. My mother adored her. Rebecca could interrupt me mid-sentence, and my mother would laugh like it was charming. Rebecca could miss Thanksgiving, and my mother would spend the whole meal explaining how important her work was. Rebecca could insult me and call it honesty. I, on the other hand, was always too sensitive. When I was 23, Rebecca helped me get a job at a property management company that serviced luxury rentals and vacation homes. At the time, I thought she was doing me a favor. I told myself maybe this was how sisters repaired things, not with apologies, but with opportunity. I worked hard. I handled guest issues, managed vendor schedules, solved last-minute crises, checked properties before arrivals, stayed late when cleaning crews didn't show up, and learned fast. I learned how wealthy people lived, but more importantly, I learned what they paid for. They didn't pay for mops and vacuum lines. They paid for peace. They paid for someone to make problems disappear before they ever became visible. They paid for someone discreet, reliable, unshakable, invisible. For 4 years, I gave that company everything I had. And then one Tuesday morning, I got called into the office and fired. No warning. No real explanation. Just vague phrases about professional concerns and team alignment. I remember sitting there with my hands folded in my lap while the regional manager avoided eye contact and slid paperwork across the desk like she was passing a menu. I packed my things in a cardboard box and walked out through the side entrance like someone who had stolen something. 2 weeks later, a former coworker called me. She said, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your sister pushed for it." I was standing in a grocery store parking lot when she said it. I remember because the sun was too bright, and there was a shopping cart rolling loose across the asphalt while my whole life quietly rearranged itself. Apparently, Rebecca had told leadership I was too familiar with clients, not polished enough for high-end accounts, too soft, too emotional, too messy for the brand they wanted. Messy. That word stayed with me. I went home to my tiny apartment, sat on the floor, and stared at the wall until it got dark. Then I did the only thing I knew how to do. I made a list. Bills, rent, gas, credit cards, food. I had 7 weeks before panic became disaster. My Aunt Denise was the one who saved me, though she would never call it that. Denise was my mother's older sister, 61, single, loud, funny, and treated like the family's cautionary tale because she had spent her life doing whatever she wanted. She owned a flower shop, wore red lipstick at breakfast, and once told me, "The people who judge you the hardest are usually terrified you'll stop needing them." When I called her crying, she didn't waste time with sympathy speeches. She said, "Good, now you know who they are." Then she found me my first client, a widow named Mrs. Hawthorne who lived alone in Highland Park in a house so large it echoed. I was hired to clean twice a week, but by the third visit, I was doing more than that. I organized her pantry, labeled her medications, coordinated a plumber, set reminders for her appointments, fixed the stack of unpaid utility bills on her desk. Not because anyone asked me to, because I saw what needed to be done. She told a friend. That friend told another. Within 3 months, I had 6 clients. I wasn't just cleaning. I was managing households. And I noticed something no one else seemed to understand. The wealthier the client, the more valuable trust became. You can teach someone to fold linen. You can't teach people to feel safe handing over the hidden parts of their lives. I saw divorces before they became public. Health scares before adult children were informed. Credit problems hidden behind designer handbags. Empty ghost houses, broken marriages, lonely dining rooms, panic behind expensive doors. And I never repeated a word. That became my reputation. Not sparkling kitchens, not perfect corners, discretion. In May, I filed the paperwork for Carter Household Concierge. It wasn't glamorous at first. It was me, one used laptop, a cheap logo I made online, a secondhand printer, and a folding table in my apartment dining nook pretending to be an office. I hired my first employee in August, my second in October. By the end of the year, I had 12 regular clients and a waiting list. We handled full home resets, event preparation, vendor coordination, short-term rental turnovers, seasonal organization, elder household support, arrival services, departure services, stocking, staging, and private home oversight for clients who traveled. It was still service work, but it was strategic service work. It was high trust, high touch, premium support. It was a business. My family never knew, partly because they never asked, partly because I stopped volunteering pieces of myself to people who treated information like ammunition. Whenever my mother asked how work was going, I said, "Busy." Whenever Rebecca asked if I was still cleaning, I said, "Something like that." Whenever my father asked whether I'd thought about going back to a more stable job, I said, "I'm doing fine," which was the truth. By year 2, I had employees across 3 neighborhoods and contracts with property owners, private residences, and boutique hospitality groups. Then came the breakthrough. A boutique hotel operator named Marcus Vale hired us after a recommendation from one of my residential clients. He owned a stylish independent hotel in Uptown that catered to executives, event clients, and luxury travelers. His in-house team was struggling, turnover was high, and standards were slipping. He gave us a 90-day trial. We transformed the place. Training systems, inspection checklists, guest-ready standards, emergency coverage, supervisor reporting, vendor accountability. At the end of those 90 days, he signed a year contract. Then, he introduced me to 2 more property owners. That was when everything changed. The company grew faster than I had planned for, but not faster than I could manage. I'd spent my whole life adapting inside rooms where I wasn't valued. Running a business was strangely easier than surviving my family. Numbers made sense. Systems made sense. Effort leading to results made sense. Love had never made sense. Work did. The irony was almost too perfect when I learned one of Rebecca's firm's preferred venues for client events was one of the properties my company serviced. She had probably walked through my work dozens of times. She had probably complimented details my team created. She had probably praised standards I trained people to maintain. And she never once imagined I had built any of it. Then came Christmas dinner. My parents hosted it every year on the Sunday before the holiday. Same gold napkin rings. Same crystal bowl of candied pecans. Same music low in the background. Same hierarchy in human form. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a pecan pie from a bakery I liked. My mother took both without comment and asked if I could help in the kitchen. Of course. Rebecca arrived 40 minutes later in a cream coat, carrying expensive dessert boxes and the confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged in a room. My mother lit up the second she walked in. By 6:30, the house was full. Cousins, family friends, my parents' neighbors, one of Rebecca's colleagues, and Denise, bless her, seated at the far end of the living room with the expression of a woman prepared to commit minor crimes in my defense. Dinner went exactly the way it always did. Rebecca talking, my mother praising, my father nodding, everyone else listening, and me moving in and out of the kitchen like staff. Halfway through dessert, my mother stood to make a toast. I felt it before she opened her mouth. Some people can smell rain. I can smell humiliation. She thanked everyone for coming, praised family, praised blessings, praised Rebecca's latest promotion. Then she turned to me and smiled with that bright, polished cruelty I knew too well. "And Naomi," she said, laughing softly, "our hardworking girl. Rebecca argues cases in glass towers, and Naomi still makes beds better than anyone in Texas." The room laughed. It wasn't explosive.
It was worse than that.
It was comfortable. The kind of laugh people give when they think they understand your place. I looked around the table. My father looked down. Rebecca smirked into her wine. A few guests glanced away, and Aunt Denise was already halfway to standing up. I touched her arm under the table. Just once. Enough to stop her. Then I stood on my own. I picked up my napkin, folded it carefully, set it beside my plate, and said, "Thank you for clarifying what this family thinks I'm worth." No one moved. No one spoke. And because I had finally learned the difference between a scene and a boundary, I picked up my purse and walked out. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't scream. I just drove. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the Dallas Women in Business Foundation. I had been selected to receive their Emerging Founder Award at their winter gala in 10 days. 500 guests, local business press, sponsor tables, networking reception, award presentation, honoree speech, 8 guest tickets. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because life has a vicious sense of timing. I accepted. I invited Denise first. Then, through the official guest portal, I sent tickets to my parents and Rebecca with a short note. Thought this might be a nice event for the family. Rebecca responded almost immediately. "Looks interesting. We'll be there." Of course they would. They thought it was just another room they belonged in. The week before the gala, I rewrote my speech 6 times. The first version was angry. The second was wounded. The third tried too hard to sound noble. The fourth named things I no longer wanted to carry. By the 6th draft, I understood something important. I did not need to expose them to defeat them. Truth, clearly spoken, was enough. The gala was held at a downtown hotel with floor-to-ceiling windows and a ballroom dressed in silver and midnight blue. I wore a dark sapphire dress, simple and sharp. My hair was swept back. My makeup was understated. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was getting ready to be accepted. I felt like I was arriving as myself. Backstage, I peeked through the curtain and found my family at table 18. My mother looked thrilled to be there. My father looked confused. Rebecca looked bored. None of them had any idea. The MC began introducing the award. She spoke about resilience, innovation,
Growth.
leadership, community trust. Then she said the company name. Then the revenue growth. Then the client expansion. Then the employment numbers. Rebecca's head lifted. My mother frowned. And when the MC smiled and said, "Please welcome this year's Emerging Founder Award recipient, Naomi Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Household Concierge," my mother's face lost all color. I walked into the spotlight. The applause was warm and immediate, but I barely heard it. I reached the podium, looked out over the room, and saw Denise in the front row already crying. I saw Marcus Vale grinning near the stage. I saw two of my managers at the back table, clapping like proud siblings. I saw strangers smiling at me with respect. And at table 18, I saw my family frozen in place. I began. 4 years ago, I lost a job I thought defined me. At the time, I thought the worst thing in the world was being dismissed. I know better now. The worst thing is believing dismissal is the same as truth. The room went quiet. I started over doing work many people look down on, work they benefit from, depend on, and rarely respect. And in that work, I found something surprising. I found that service, done with excellence, is not small. Care is not small. Reliability is not small. Building peace in other people's lives is not small. I paused. There were people in my life who saw my work and assumed it meant I had no ambition. People who confused humility with failure. People who thought if a job wasn't glamorous, the person doing it must not matter. Now the room was still enough to hear glass set quietly onto linen. But dignity does not come from a title. It comes from what you build, how you show up, and whether you keep going when no one is clapping for you yet. I looked directly toward table 18. And for anyone who has ever been underestimated by the people closest to them, I want to say this clearly. Their blindness is not your limit. The applause started before I finished, then rose into something bigger than applause. It became recognition, not just for the company, for me. A standing ovation. My family remained seated for the first few seconds, then awkwardly stood when everyone around them did. But by then it no longer mattered. The reception afterward was a blur of conversations, handshakes, cards, congratulations, interviews, photos, and introductions. Investors, hotel owners, local press, women I admired, people who spoke to me like my name already belonged in their mouths. Eventually, my mother found me near the edge of the room. She looked fragile in a way I had never seen before. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment, because it was the first honest question she had asked me in years. Then I said, "You never made me feel like my truth would be safe with you." She started crying immediately. Not dramatic crying, real crying. The kind that comes when someone suddenly sees themselves from the outside. Behind her, my father stood a few feet away, ashamed. Rebecca stayed near the bar, pretending not to watch. My mother said, "We had no idea." And I answered, "That's the problem." Not because they didn't know, because they never cared to. My father approached after that. He said he was sorry. He said he should have spoken up years ago. He said he had failed me. For once, I agreed. Rebecca came last. She folded her arms and said, "You made us look ridiculous tonight." That was the moment I knew nothing had changed for her. So I smiled, and I said, "No, Rebecca. I just stopped making it easy for you to ignore me." Then I walked away. That was 3 months ago. Since then, my mother has called more than I can count. My father has written 2 letters. Real letters. Handwritten. Denise says that means guilt finally found a spine. Rebecca sent 1 message asking if we could move forward like adults. I haven't answered. Not because I want revenge. Not because I'm angry every minute. Not because I enjoy the distance. But because peace is expensive and I paid too much for mine to hand it back cheaply. My company now has 42 employees. We just signed a new hospitality contract. I moved into a townhouse with a small office downstairs and a kitchen full of sunlight. On Saturday mornings, I drink coffee on the patio and think about how strange it is that the life I was once ashamed to describe became the life that finally set me free. Sometimes people ask if I regret not telling my family sooner. I don't. Silence protected me while I was building. Distance protected me while I was healing. And truth protected me when it was finally time to be seen. So no, this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when the person everyone underestimated stops asking for permission to matter. If you've ever been the invisible one in your family, the one they overlooked, the one they compared, the one they reduced to a joke at the table, hear me when I say this. Their version of you is not your destiny. Build anyway, grow anyway, win quietly if you have to. And when your moment comes, don't waste it trying to hurt the people who hurt you. Just stand in the light long enough for the truth to do its work. Because one day they will see you, and by then, you won't need them to. If this story hit home for you, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. There's more coming.